This week I'm going to change it up a little bit. Tuesday is my birthday. I'm not going to tell you how old I am. You can look that up on Wikipedia. No, actually, I will tell you. I'm 61 on Tuesday. I've been doing this job a long time, almost 40 years professionally. So I figured this week, in honor of my birthday, I would go through the top 5 highlights of my career. Now, I thought about this. I tried to figure out which ones were the best, and really, there have been so many highlights, it's hard to pick them out. Now, I'm not going to write about this because I don't want people commenting and telling me, Ken, these are not the highlights of your career. I think these are the highlights of your career. No, we're not doing that. These are my highlights. I get to pick. And I'm going to start with my number 5 highlight. We'll go through them one by one. Number 5 would be the 1987 Fiesta Bowl. That's right, not baseball. The 1987 Fiesta Bowl was the first major event I covered professionally. I was working at the time for the Courier-Post in South Jersey, right outside of Philadelphia. I had covered a big event in college as a freshman, the 1980 Final Four in Philadelphia at the Spectrum, Indiana versus North Carolina championship game. I was working for Penn's Sports Information Department at the time, and somehow I had wangled a press credential for the 1980 Final Four. Don't ask how I did it. I don't even remember. But the 1987 Fiesta Bowl, that was my first big step professionally, first big event. I don't know why the Courier-Post sent me. Maybe it was because of the holiday, New Year's, and nobody else on the staff wanted to go. But I was privileged to go. And originally, I was supposed to watch the game at Arizona State's campus in the basketball arena. That was the overflow setting for writers who did not get placed or seated in the stadium, Sun Devil Stadium. And that was fine with me. I was thrilled to be there. It was a cool matchup. Remember, Penn State at the time, Testaverde, Paterno. Miami, they were the bad guys. They were the black hats and all that stuff. Jerome Brown. They walked out of the steak fry that week. They arrived in Phoenix in military garb. It was a great, great scene. And Miami was heavy favorites. They had Vinny Testaverde, Heisman Trophy winner. They were unbeaten, as was Penn State, but Miami had been more dominant. So I'm ready to cover this game in the arena, and moments before, maybe 10 minutes before, I get a tap on my shoulder. Someone from the Fiesta Bowl said, hey, we've got a seat for you in the press box. And boy, did they ever. My seat in the press box, it turns out, was on like the 50-yard line. I was so ecstatic and so excited, thrilled to cover the game. It was an incredible game. Penn State, brilliant upset. Testaverde, I believe, threw 5 interceptions. And I wrote my story about Testaverde, saying essentially, hey, man, this guy, he didn't rise to the occasion. I'm 23 years old at the time. I go back home to New Jersey, sort of proud of the job I did, get called into the principal's office, specifically the sports editor's office. And he says to me, not a good game story there, buddy. And I was like, why? He said, the story was Penn State. We are in a Penn State coverage area, South Jersey, and people here wanted to read about Penn State and how great they were defensively, not Testaverde throwing the 5 interceptions. Well, learned a lesson that day, but at the same time, it was still a career highlight. All right, number 4 on the list, 1992 Olympics in Barcelona, Spain. First Olympics I covered. I'm working for the Baltimore Sun now, and we actually sent 4 people to Barcelona. These were the days when newspapers actually did things like that. 4 people. Mike Preston, still a columnist of the Baltimore Sun. Mike Litwin, one of the great columnists ever as a sports writer. And Bill Glauber, who at the time, in my mind, was the best Olympics writer in the country. All 4 of us sharing an apartment, a big apartment, in Barcelona. How cool was that? It was really cool. And I remember the opening ceremonies, same kind of thing. I wasn't supposed to get in, and I got a ticket at the last minute. They had only a certain number reserved for the U.S. writers. That was great. But what I remember most was an assignment given to me by Bill Glauber. Now, he was, like I said, one of the top Olympics writers. He was also a little crazy, like a lot of us are. And he said, Ken, why don't you do a story on what it's like to go to as many events in a day as you can. Call it a day at the games. Just pop in different events, see as many as you can. Well, I did this. It was hot in Barcelona. I went to, 15, 18 events. I wasn't at any of them for very long. And at the end of the day, I'm trudging up this hill. It's hot still. I'm sweaty. I stink. and I'm going to this judo match. That's going to be the last thing I cover. So I go up this big hill, fighting the crowd, finally get to my seat in the arena, or take a seat in the media area, sit down, kind of take a deep breath, look to my right, and there is the King of Spain watching this judo event because a Spanish woman was competing. It was incredible. And that is why the Olympics are on my list of highlights. Actually, any Olympics would be. I covered two others, 1996 Atlanta and 1998 Nagano, but they weren't nearly what the 1992 Olympics were. All right, number 3 on my list, 1991 World Series. Braves and Twins. Covered this for the Baltimore Evening Sun, no longer with us. And that was a World Series that still for me is number 1. 5 one-run games, 3 in extra innings. Couldn't wait to get to the ballpark each day. Now, the Baltimore Evening Sun was a paper that published 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. So at the end of Game 5, I came home because there was a possibility that the series would end on Saturday, Game 6, and I wouldn't need to go back. They didn't want to send me back for an event that would take place Saturday, and I wouldn't be writing until Monday. Fair enough. So I go home. What happens Saturday night in Game 6? Kirby Puckett, walk-off homer, Jack Buck, the famous call, we'll see you tomorrow night. I get on a plane to Minnesota. The next day, Game 7, Smoltz and Jack Morris, one of the great duels in World Series history. Jack Morris, 10 scoreless innings. The Twins win on the Gene Larkin single, and I remember this vividly. This is one of my highlights. Post-game press conference, I asked Tom Kelly a question, and my question was this. What would it have taken to get Jack Morris out of that game? And Tom Kelly, who didn't smile much, very serious guy, but a great baseball person, he said, what would it take? Would have taken a shotgun. 1991 World Series, number 3 on my list. Number 2 on my list, the 2011 World Series, specifically Game 6. Now, there have been some other great World Series I've covered. 2001, certainly after 9/11. With the Yankees, that was really emotional. 2016, the Cubs beating then the Indians. That was an amazing World Series too. But 2011 stands out for me because of Game 6. And I look back, Game 6 was a game that wasn't the best played game ever. There were 5 errors in this game committed. But the Cardinals and Rangers, it was just one of these nights that seemed like it would never end, and there was so much drama. You remember the Cardinals' comeback, of course. The Rangers had a 3-run lead in the 7th. They were 1 out away in the 9th. David Freese, the RBI triple past the leaping Nelson Cruz, one of the more famous plays in recent memory. That tied it. Josh Hamilton, 2-run homer in the 10th. This was when Josh Hamilton was Josh Hamilton. And then the Rangers were 1 strike away again in the bottom of the 10th when Lance Berkman tied it with an RBI single. Freeze then the walk-off in the 11th, and Joe Buck, Jack Buck's son, who I'm working with on the Fox broadcast, has his own immortal call, which was the same as his dad's 20 years before. We'll see you tomorrow night. Game 7 was a little bit anticlimactic. The Cardinals won, of course, but that Game 6, anyone who saw it will never forget it. Finally, number 1 on my list, I've talked about this a lot. And it will always be number 1 in my mind, no matter what happens. Cal Ripken breaking the consecutive game record in 1995 at Camden Yards. Now, it's number 1 for me because I was working in Baltimore at the time. I was a columnist for the Sun at this point, past a beat writer. I had graduated to columnist, and I was still pretty young. I was not yet 33, just about to turn 33. And back then, before the internet, before you can read anything you wanted pretty much online, there wasn't an opportunity for sports writers to read each other's work unless they were in the same town. So I knew going into that game, the record breaker, we were all counting down to it, that sports writers would be flying in from all over the country. This was a big event. President Clinton was there, Vice President Gore was there. Both guys were there. Joe DiMaggio was there, and a host of other dignitaries. So I knew that my fellow sports writers would be seeing my work the next day, and I wanted to be as good as I could be. And Mike Litwin, I mentioned him before. I talked to him that day. He kind of guided me through maybe how to go about writing the column that night. I did not know what would happen, of course. No one did. remember the victory lap and all the things that happened. It was just a beautiful occasion. And the next day, my column was on the front page of the Baltimore Sun. And people say all the time, you guys, you're always looking for headlines. You're always looking to sell papers. Well, they don't say that so much anymore. But back then they said it a lot. And the truth of the matter is, the newspaper, the day after Cal Ripken broke the consecutive games record, was the best-selling newspaper in the history of the Baltimore Sun. And I would say it was a pretty positive event. So that remains the highlight of my career. And I've even got this column framed to this day because it's something that just stands out to me so vividly. And the last thing I'll say about it was that night when I came home in Baltimore, my wife was waiting for me, and she had watched the game. Not really a sports fan, but she had watched the game, and she said, you know something? I was really glad you got to cover that. That was really cool. You have to write about so many negative things and so many bad things that are happening all the time. And this was a positive thing. This was something really great. I don't know that it was my best column that night, but it was my best shot. And it's something I'm really proud of to this day. It's a night I will never forget. Number one on my list of highlights.